Is Autumn going to join us? Does anybody know?
I haven't heard otherwise that she wouldn't be joining us.
Okay.
Can text her.
Can you make me a host, Amalia?
Yeah, you should be good now. Try it right now.
That says host disabled screen sharing.
Still? Oh, there's two of you.
There's two of me. That's a problem.
There we go. I've done it a few times.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. I have one working camera, and I'd prefer to, yeah.
Yes. All right. Good. Let me try that one now. Now will it work?
Hey, Dan, is that one of your cabinets in the background?
Yep.
Okay. That's I recognize the style.
What style is it? What do you mean?
His style.
Essence of me.
Daniel, the thing with the point, is that what he's talking about?
Yep.
Behind you?
Monica, are you able to share now?
I see. That's a cabinet. Did you make it?
Yep.
Oh, whoa. Is it wooden or metal?
It's wood, mostly wood.
Okay. It has an attic.
No, the pyramid on top is just to make sure everything doesn't change underneath it in the cabinet, right?
That's an unconditioned attic. It does not count for FAR.
Doesn't count as a second floor.
Monica, you should be able to share from either account now.
It's not big enough for an ADA.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I have it up too if you have any troubles with it.
Good. Great. How's that? Everyone can see my screen?
Yep.
Super.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great.
Maya, do you want to wait to start the screen share till the meeting is officially opened, or?
I've got 4 minutes.
We can keep that as the backdrop. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Well, I think we will want to pause the screen sharing at least to get through the Pledge of Allegiance. As I have the flag all prepared.
Should I take it down in that case?
I think so. We'll start with the regular agenda.
Okay, great.
Hey, Lester, do you get paid extra for providing the flag?
No, I do not. But, it's been so long since the Planning Commission has had a raise. I think we should probably. Well, here's the deal, John. You ought to tuck it into the zoning ordinance.
Ah, there we go.
Yep.
Mhm.
Like they do it in Sacramento, how they just sort of slip something in at the last minute.
I hope that flag is facing in so that the wind is westerly. If not, would you,
Facing any way I want it to.
well, would you please put it that way so it's a westerly wind?
Yep, no worries. We have a strong onshore breeze with that flag.
Good at this point. Hey, Adam.
Hi. How's it going?
Smoky?
Yeah. It's gross.
Although yesterday morning it was actually pretty nice. Air Quality District said we had good air yesterday morning until about 11.
Yep. It hasn't, this is the worst day. I think it's been, it's been hard for sensitive people, but it's been in that area. It's been under 150, it's been down fairly low. Fingers crossed.
Well, 22% contained.
Yeah.
I wish they'd show the containment lines on our map. They show the containment lines on Solano's map. Cal Fire doesn't show the containment lines, and we don't show the containment lines. I wish the county map would. It'd make it easier to decide what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
Sure, it's 6 o'clock if we want to start the meeting.
Very good, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will convene the special meeting of the St. Helena Planning Commission scheduled for today, Monday, August 24th at 6 p.m. I'm going to start by reading a description of the orders that apply to our Zoom meetings. In accordance with Executive Order N29-20 and guidance from the California Department of Public Health on gatherings, remote public participation is allowed. We will address the order in the following ways. Members of the public may not physically attend meetings. The Planning Commission meeting will be live streamed on Comcast Channel 28 and on the city's website, barring technical difficulties to be discussed in a minute. Those members of the public wishing to participate must do so remotely via Zoom electronic meetings in the following ways: by either logging onto the Zoom link located on the meeting agenda. Please download the app to your computer or mobile device and enter the meeting ID, or by calling a listed number and entering the meeting ID. Public comment for Planning Commission meetings will be accepted via email to publiccomment@cityofsthelena.org. All public comments must be emailed by 4 p.m. prior to the meeting. Emailed public comments will not be read out loud, but will be publicly available and attached to the online Planning Commission agenda. There's additional detail on all of this at the end of the agenda. And I do want to add that I've been advised that today, because of the smoky conditions out of doors, the school district has turned off the air conditioning at the Carnegie building, which is where our live broadcast equipment is located. There is some concern that we may lose that broadcast if the equipment overheats, but we won't know till that happens, and I'm not sure if here on Zoom we will know at all. I'm putting that out there for members of the public, and it is a reminder that in spite of all the trials and tribulations of our fire on top of pandemic, we are all still doing everything we can to keep the city functioning as normally, and we have been remarkably safe here in Napa County and continue to be, for which I think we can only give thanks to all of those in the county health department, our first responders, and everyone else who is looking after us. Thank you all. So in that case, I think for the Pledge of Allegiance, the key is for everyone to mute but me, and then I can say the pledge for all of us, and that should work just fine. So I will begin now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So at this point, Ms. Gamero, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Monette,
Here.
Commissioner Hale,
Here?
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Vice Chair Pont,
Here.
and Chair Hardy.
Here. That brings us to the public forum. This is always for me the most confusing part of a special meeting agenda because there is no public forum at a special meeting. So all of those members of the public who are attending at special meetings, we stick to the agenda topics, and there will be an opportunity to comment then. So then that takes us to consent items, of which there are none, public hearings, of which there are none, and we can roll straight into the business of the evening, which is item 6.1, our comprehensive zoning code update. And I believe our planning director, Ms. DeRosa, may have some words for us to get that started.
Thank you, Chair Hardy. Yes, I'd love to provide some opening comments while we get the PowerPoint queued up to go through for the evening agenda. My name is Maya DeRosa. I'm the Planning and Building Director for the city. I'm also the project manager for this ongoing effort. This is our second Planning Commission meeting on this topic. We started this project in January with some stakeholder interviews, and we produced a memo about that. And our next work product was a recommendations memo, which is the subject of our discussion today. All these materials have been posted on the website for the project, and also as you have seen on the agenda. So if we can move to the next slide, please, for the introductions. At this point, I will move the meeting over to our consulting team, Lisa Wise, who's also been on board since January and is here to provide more context and background for the discussion tonight. And also we will wrap up with the project schedule and questions to ponder as we go forward with this work effort. So I'll move it on to the self-introductions for Lisa and Monica.
Great. Thanks, Maya. I'm Lisa Wise of Lisa Wise Consulting. It's good to be back. We have a lot to talk about, and we're looking forward to the discussion. Should we have Monica introduce herself, Maya, and then go to the agenda? Okay. Maya, Monica.
Yeah, hi, I'm Monica Siblick. I'm a senior associate with Lisa Wise Consulting, and I'm the project manager. And I'm excited to be working on this project and to be before you for the second time.
Monica, it's a little bit hard to hear you. I'm not sure if you're, at least for me, I don't know if anyone else is having that difficulty.
All right, I'll speak up. How's
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
So Maya, do you want to go through the agenda, or should I jump in?
Feel free to go through the agenda.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, everybody. Chair, planning commissioners, members of the public. I am Lisa Wise. We're very glad to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project objectives and the schedule. Maya talked about it a little bit, but I want to go into a little bit more detail where we've been in the last 7 or 8 months and sort of where we're going through next year. And then Monica's going to talk about the recommendations memos and really the findings from that. And that's the bulk of the presentation. So she's going to go over all of the recommendations in some detail, and then the outline for the proposed code. Really, there's two purposes for the meeting. It's to have a shared understanding of the findings and the direction of the recommendations. So as we move forward, your expectations are met, and we understand the issues as you understand them, and to think about the outline and format of the code. because as we start populating the code, we're going to use the recommendations and outlines we're talking about tonight. And again, just meeting those expectations. And the new code, just to be clear, will look and feel different. Even if the regulations stay the same, they'll be reformatted and potentially rewritten to be plain English. So this is what we want to kind of talk about tonight. So moving forward, there's no surprises and next steps. And then with a large project like this, there's always a number of objectives. And really the key objective is to implement the general plan and reflect or incorporate the community character and the vision into the zoning code. The zoning code is a key implementation tool for the general plan. But in addition to implementing the general plan, it should be grounded in market and economic realities. We're not just creating a code to sit on the shelf. It should really be grounded in those realities and facilitate investment in the community and development of housing for all income types. So as we understand it, these are key goals in the general plan and key objectives of the code update. Of course, it should be legally adequate. And as we all know, with the flood of legislation coming out of Sacramento, this is an ongoing task, but we'll be working on that. And then it should be user-friendly. So when we think about a code, we think about the standards, the procedures, but also how it looks and feels. We have some descriptions and examples of that. And then it's our understanding that it should comply with the general plan and be consistent with that CEQA document and fit into the existing CEQA clearance for the general plan. We talked about this a little bit last time, but we also wanted to be clear about what zoning does and doesn't do. Zoning is a set of regulations for the built form. So it does tell you where uses are allowed and not allowed. And that's actually one of the key components of a conventional code. But it also regulates the built form, building height, setback, landscaping, parking, signage. All of those things are part of this regulatory environment that we're evaluating and updating for the city. It can also have these sort of softer performance standards that regulate nuisances or components of the built environment that may be problematic, like noise, odor, lighting, those kind of things in the built environment that we want to take into account when we update the zoning. And really, in the end, it should create more certainty, predictability for all code users, not just developers, but also residents and businesses. So as people move forward, there's more clarity in what can and can't be done. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't really create land use policy. Again, that's what we're implementing the general plan. That's really more of a component of the general plan and not really the zoning part. We might be talking a little bit about policy, but that should have happened at the general plan level to a large degree. And it doesn't really manipulate the free market, right? It doesn't really create demand where there's no demand. We can't always predict what's going to happen on a piece of property, so it doesn't regulate the free market. And typically, it doesn't regulate or dictate architectural style. Those are more commonly found in design guidelines and those kind of documents. I want to talk about just the schedule overall, kind of where we've been and where we're going. So we did kick off the work December, early January. So it's been an 8 or 9 month process to date. February, March, we had one-on-one and small group stakeholder interviews. We talked to almost 35 people over a number of days in late February and early March. And then, as you know, in early May 5th, we had a joint planning commission council meeting where we kicked the project off in more of a public way, reported out on those stakeholder interviews. What are the main takeaways? And did we hear it right? But we also talked about state requirements for objective design standards, affordable housing issues, and there was a little bit of discussion on public outreach and COVID, among other things. So that's what we did at our last meeting in May. And then in June, we released the recommendations memo and the annotated outline. And that's really the bulk of what we want to talk about tonight. And Monica's going to walk through that with you. Hopefully people have had some time. But again, it's really getting that shared understanding of those recommendations as we move into next steps. And the PRD is scheduled to come out in April of next year. But the next slide shows just the sequence of meetings that we anticipate happening between now and the PRD. So tonight, again, the recommendations memo, but between now and the release of the PRD in April, there's going to be a number of additional meetings with Planning Commission. The next meeting is proposed for November, and that's where we're talking about the district regulations. That's the zones, the overlay zones, the use tables. To some extent, is sort of the bulk or meat of the code. And then after that, we'll talk about the citywide standards and admin and procedures. Citywide standards, we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. It's parking, it's landscaping, it's performance standards, it's affordable housing is in that. That meeting would be in February. And then in April, once the PRD is out, we'll have another meeting sort of walking through all components of the code, what's changed and not changed when we get together. But these interim meetings will be kind of working through particular topics, controversial issues, clarifications on certain sections of the code. But as I said, the bulk of tonight is really the recommendations and walking through that. And I'm going to turn it over to Monica to go through that material. Thanks, Monica. You're on mute, Monica.
Hi. Hi again, everyone. Thanks, Lisa. So I will be going through sort of a summary and the major takeaways of the recommendations memo and annotated outline that you have in your packet. So it generally follows, I'll be sort of talking about our recommendations by topic, consistent with the organization of the memo you have in front of you. So starting with code organization and usability. So this is sort of getting at when Lisa said the sort of how it feels and the look and feel of the code. So in general, your existing code is a little bit difficult to navigate sort of a series of chapters that start out with some administrative chapters. It goes on to present base zones one at a time, followed by overlays, and then some overall site regulations, some chapters about specific uses, affordable housing and housing trust fund, and then back to some administrative chapters, and then back to some specific to use chapters. So we propose to sort of group together like chapters for ease of use. And take out all of the definitions into one definition section and create a rules of measurement section. So that is clarifying how do we measure, for example, standards that are expressed in area or height or distance, because that can have a major impact on what the standards mean ultimately. So generally, we'll present concepts in a logical sequence and more intuitive sequence without jumping back from one topic to another and back again. Within each chapter, concepts and provisions will be presented to reflect a hierarchy of importance and how often the users are expected to reference them. And then I mentioned consolidate definitions and provide clear rules of clear rules of measurement. So in terms of legibility, there are a handful of organizational tools we'd like to use to simplify the code and make it easier to read. We'll use tables and cross-references. This table that you see here includes a column for cross-references. Graphics, as you know, are helpful in illustrating concepts. These tables, these kinds of layouts we find effective in presenting development standards where we have keyed diagrams. So there's some text and an illustration to demonstrate any one particular concept, like a width or a setback or a dimension having to do with a particular adjacency. They're generally shown in plan with supplemental standards following the diagrams. Graphics, as you know, are helpful. Sometimes they're best shown in section or in plan or in elevation or in axonometric drawings or perspective. So we'll use these as they're most effective for whichever kind of drawing is most effective to demonstrate a concept. The next category of recommendations that we've described have to do with zoning districts. So one thing we heard a lot and sort of is most readily apparent when we look at the new general plan in the existing zoning code is that the district boundaries for the proposed land uses described in the general plan don't correspond to general plan land use categories. So right now there are 3 different existing zoning districts that are implementing, for example, a medium density residential or service commercial. So we'll try to get it closer to sort of a 1-to-1, so that the regulations within one zoning district really describe the intent behind the land use that's in the general plan. We've called out here a policy from the general plan, update the zoning ordinance map to be compatible with the general plan land use map and designations. So that's—
Can you speak a little louder? I'm sorry.
Yes, yes. So generally, streamline the correspondence between the general plan land uses and the zoning districts. And we know it won't necessarily be a 1-to-1 correspondence, but we'll start out that way. And to the extent that we can achieve that, we'd like to sort of aim for that. And then, as you know, we'll create a new residential mixed use zoning designation, which doesn't exist in the code, to implement the new general plan land use. Right now, the zoning code includes a handful of overlay districts, and the boundaries and the purposes aren't entirely clear, so we'll clarify that. Our first sort of inclination for revising these overlay districts is to keep the mobile home park as it is, keep the parking impact district, update the standards so that they support the community desires and vision, show a historic preservation district that's congruent with the National Register district, update the standards so that they demonstrate the character of the historic areas that the community values. We'll probably take away the rural residential overlay district and make sure that any part of it that should remain is incorporated in the base zone standards as appropriate. The special flood zone, as you know, is not mapped right now on the zoning map. Probably a separate map would be most effective there. And then remove the planned development district unless there is, unless it can't be achieved, the intent of that district can't be achieved in base zone standards. So use regulations, this is a big focus of the code update. Right now, the list of permitted uses and conditionally permitted uses in the various zones is out of date. The uses are, the list of uses tend to be repetitive throughout the code. It's difficult to compare the uses that are permitted or conditionally permitted in one district against those of another, because they're literally in lists in your zoning code. So we'll propose a use classification system that sort of simplifies and groups uses and consolidates standards, sort of groups them so they're sort of easier to apply across zones. So this table here shows a group of zones, so it shows zones across the top row and grouped uses along the left column, with additional supplemental standards, cross references to additional supplemental standards in the far right column. So this sort of saves space and makes it easier to sort of see what you're doing, what the code is doing across districts and how the districts compare to each other. As you know, a lot of the uses are outdated. They're reflective of a code that was written long ago, and they're not representative of current uses, of contemporary uses. They don't necessarily allow the uses you want, or even name them. So our updated use tables will reflect contemporary land uses, get rid of ones that nobody expects to see again, make sure that each zone supports an appropriate mix of land uses. And then we mentioned standards specific to uses in a separate section, uses that may appear across many zones. We'd have standards specific to those in their own section. So looking at development standards, there's a few ways to talk about these. So we talk about standards that are specific to zone. For example, an RM zone might have standards that apply throughout and only to that zone. Other standards are sort of applied to many or all zones. So looking at standards by zone, we can think of a few holes in the code. There's no standards for vertical mixed use. The code doesn't address infill or adaptive reuse well enough. The code isn't right now. We want to make sure that the code supports the density goals that are identified in the general plan. And we know that standards in historical areas don't preserve the character that the city values. So a lot of our development standards our revisions to development standards will be focusing on these particular areas that the community and stakeholders have identified as, well, this is where the code is lacking, and this is what we want to make sure that we cover in the revised code. Clear standards for building placement and overall envelope. So this is setbacks, height, upper floor step backs, addressing adjacencies where one district abuts another, ensuring that the development standards support the parking configurations that are recommended and that the community is looking for, and making sure that the standards reflect the character of different areas. As you know, the recent legislation has required that codes incorporate sort of objective design standards, and we know that it's a sort of a goal of the community to reduce reliance on discretionary review. So we want to ensure that the code provides objective design guidance to the extent that it needs to, and it doesn't currently do that. So we'll look at topics of design beyond those of basic building placement and overall building envelope and form. And this is design issues across the board. And it'll vary by corridor, area, downtown, neighborhood. And these are shalls as opposed to shoulds. These are requirements. But they will address the whole of design in the way that we want the code to. Other citywide standards, Lisa mentioned before, performance standards, impacts that one use might have on another in terms of noise or odor. We know that the code needs to look at nonconformities. So this is nonconforming sites, nonconforming uses, nonconforming structures. What are the best provisions to ensure that future improvements can happen? without encouraging the creation of more nonconformity. Improving the clarity of the code about affordable housing, density bonuses, fee structure. We learned that the code could benefit from some more clarity on these topics. So some of our recommendations here for these. The last category of recommendations that we describe in the memo have to do with admin and procedures. Generally speaking, we would like to improve these sections to enhance predictability and lower the threshold for design review. So in general, we sort of imagine a gradient of projects from kind of the simplest to get through the process to projects that require some discretionary review. Establish the review authorities, clarify noticing requirements, the findings, conditions of approval, procedures for appeal, everything from the beginning through entitlement. It should be clear and presented in sort of an intuitive way. So now we'll go through the outline. So we talked about the code being organized into 5 parts. Part 1, we have in mind, it's slim. It's essentially establishing the authority of the code and providing the code and any maps, the zoning map, FEMA map, any other maps that are referenced in the code. Part 2 is admin and procedures. So here, sort of grouping together all of these parts of the code, zoning code administration, common procedures, starting with application forms and fees and pre-application review through environmental review, public hearing noticing, conditions of approval, modifications to an approved permit. So a common procedure, generally all common procedures. Next, planning permits and approvals. So conditional use permits, minor use permits, temporary use permit, design review, development agreements, variances, on through amendments and enforcement. District regulations. So essentially all of the regulations specific to zone. It starts out by establishing each zoning district, and then districts are grouped by one chapter is all agriculture districts, the next chapter is residential, commercial and mixed use. And those are just all of the standards specific to each district. At the beginning of each chapter is a use table so that the permitted and conditionally permitted uses within each group of zones is presented in one table. Next, citywide standards. These are standards that are not specific to zone, but rather applicable throughout some or all zones. General site standards includes accessory structures, encroachments, fences, walls, and hedges, landscaping, storage. Parking and loading is common to all zones. Signage, performance standards we talked about, standards specific to uses. This can be beekeeping, cannabis uses, food trucks, service stations, and affordable housing. And then definitions and rules and measurement are part 5. So let's talk about all of this content, essentially in event 3 and 4. So tonight, what we hope to talk to you about is this overall outline and organization and the recommendations that we talked about. The next one will sort of get into the actual content of the zoning district regulations by zone. In the next one, we'll talk about all citywide standards and the admin and procedures sections. We'll put all that together into a public review draft in April. So tonight we're seeking your input and your comments that will be useful to us as we proceed to draft these sections of the code. So Maya, I think I'll hand the presentation off to you now.
Thank you. Could you advance to the discussion slide, please?
Yes.
So in the staff report materials, the report outlined these topics should look familiar. Some items for discussion that I thought would be helpful. This slide isn't meant in any way to limit discussion to these topics, but it does provide a launching point to start the discussion. I'd also offer, if Chair Hardy wants to add any comments before we entertain going through the discussion, I would welcome that too.
Well, I'll unmute myself then. Any questions or comments from the commission at this point?
Well, I had 8 questions, but I don't know, I didn't know that the discussion was going to be, somewhat, directed. So I don't know if this is appropriate for me to ask questions. When I read through the document, I came up with 8 questions. So is this the right time to do that or what?
Well,
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah.
no, go ahead, Monica, please.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So, I mean, some of them are, one of them's a typo.
Asking Monica to finish her comment, Bobby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it may not have been my turn to speak, but absolutely, I would like to hear any questions that any commissioner has about any of the material that is in the packet or in this presentation. I think tonight is a good time to hear those.
Very good. Bobby, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on page 11, I remember we discussed this, but it talks about the alphabetization, and it said there are few benefits outside of easy navigation. It seemed to me that easy navigation might be an important benefit. I was just curious. I wanted to know why it was, if it made it easier, why was that eliminated? That's page 11, 2G.
2G, okay. In general, we try to organize the sections of the code based on frequency of use and, like, for example, admin and procedures. It sort of follows how where you would need to look to get from the beginning all the way through entitlement, sort of the, it's an organization that reflects the process, or as you're designing, you need to know this, and then you need to look at one thing after another. And if there's nothing else that indicates a logical order, then alphabetization is.
That totally makes sense. Thank you for that. Then on, this is just this is kind of a couple of questions here. On page 17, LR1A, I think there's a typo. It says once acre. I think you mean 1 acre, but that's not my question. The maximum dwellings per acre is stated here is 1. I was wondering if the ADU directive from the state law applied to this zoning, and if so, should that be stated here so that the minimum is 1 with the possibility of an ADU? I just wondered about that.
I can cover that, or maybe Maya, since you guys just updated your ADU ordinance. So it doesn't reflect ADUs. ADUs are not counted towards the density under state law, so you can do ADUs in addition to the base zoning, but we can clarify that, yes.
Okay. Okay, then on page 31, in the second paragraph, opportunities to request relief from requirements that constitute a substantial burden. I was wondering who decides who gets the relief and why? Who decides what a substantial burden means? The staff, the Planning Commission? And does the public get informed about these changes? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And is there any avenue for public input when these decisions are made about substantial burden and the changes that might be made under that directive, or whatever you want to call it? Well, there are a lot of questions here. But
Can you point to the paragraph that you're looking at again?
it's page number 3. It's on page 31-3. That's what I have anyway. I'll look here.
Bobby, just I could interject. Are you talking about page of the electronic packet or the actual recommendations memo? I think that would help because there's 2 different ways of tracking the page numbers.
Oh, well, I only got the electronic packet. There was no packet at the police station, so I didn't know what to do. So I'm talking about the electronic.
Well, I can chime in. I think maybe that's the language is a little strong, but what we sometimes include in the code is a process for minor modifications, especially on infill when it's difficult to create standards that reflect every particular configuration or constraint. Sometimes we have a minor or major modification sections that lets the applicant request small deviations from the code, but those would be laid out very clearly in the code and tables, and you would see those as we move forward with the admin and procedures section. So there would be a list of them. They would be well defined, and the amount of relief would be listed in the code.
Okay, thank you.
So,
yeah.
And that language might be a little bit strong, substantial burden, but
Okay.
But it'll be clear in the code what that relief would be, and that'll come to you early in the process for discussion. When we talk about the admin procedures, I think it was February, potentially.
Okay. Thank you. I think I have the wrong page numbers here, so I'm just going to ask. Okay, so the other thing was similar use. On the similar use determination, the planning director makes its determination. I'm wondering, is there any input? A couple questions. Is there any way the planning commission would be able to get involved in similar use determination? And would that similar use determination need to be changed over time, since styles and styles change, and what might be repeated a lot during one decade or one period of time might not be, and the similar use might change? Is there a way to modify that? Those
right. Well, this is in here. This is best practice. This is in here exactly for that, because it's hard to define everything in a fast-moving economy and how things might be described in 5 or 10 or 15 years. So typically, the director is given the ability to interpret the code and interpret the uses and decide if a particular application fits within an existing definition or a use listed in the table. I've always seen it at the director level, but usually the director's decision can be appealed. So if the director decides a use fits or doesn't fit, then it can be appealed to the planning commission, but it's usually a director decision.
But I'm wondering, if it were appealed like by neighbors or something, how would they know? Who would appeal it? How would they even know that it was happening? Are they notified? Or I just wasn't clear on how that would be. I was wondering about some of these things could be appealed, and what the process was.
Well, that's a good question. It depends on how we outline it in the code, in terms of noticing those kind of decisions.
In the current
Go ahead.
zoning ordinance, we have provision for these determinations, but they come up not in a residential setting, but in a commercial setting where we have lists of uses. So where we have a list of permitted uses, sometimes, and it's impossible for the list to be exhaustive or to include all related permutations. So this is where, at least in older zoning ordinances, one would expect to find it. It could apply to conditional uses as well. And I think I'm hard pressed to imagine myself how it would apply in a residential setting where, at least with respect to single family residential projects, our discretion is ordinarily limited to design review. We don't, to put it differently, use or similarity of use is not an issue in a residential zoning district.
Well, so, what about when we're saying, there are 3 other 2-story houses on this block, or there are 5 others, or there are none. So this is, am I just completely off, or isn't that an example of similarity of use?
I don't think so. That's a design
Okay, so
question.
that's just design, that's not
No.
use.
I think this discretion really happens in commercial. It could happen in our central business district, our to be created mixed use district, our industrial district, our service commercial.
So how many wineries there are on the main street or something like that?
It's not about how many of anything. It's about whether or not, well, for example,
Okay.
there was one point when our zoning ordinance didn't say anything about bees whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
And just to make the conversation entertaining, I asked the planning director at that time whether bees were more similar to cows or to pigs. I mean, that's, I think one was prohibited. Pigs were prohibited, but cows were not. Or maybe it was cows and chickens. I can't remember my example. But that was the kind of place where a question would come up because we have a list of animals. It doesn't include all possible animals. So someone would need an answer to the question, is this kind of animal, like a bee, similar enough to any of these others that we can have it? In the case of the bees, the zoning ordinance was amended, but that's another story.
They have a good union.
Well, they do stick together.
Okay, I have a couple more. Is that okay? Can I go on or no?
Yeah, I've one more quick thought on your last question. I'm wondering if sort of shorter, simpler, grouped use lists might reduce the need for making a call like this. Does that make sense? There may not be such a need to determine whether a use is similar to a use that's explicitly stated because it's part of a group, because it's a more flexible use list to begin with.
Okay, yeah.
Well, for that, you have to make the terms broader.
SIC codes?
The more specific the list is, the more likely you are to need this discretion.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that's
I would like to see that, actually. I think it should be just, more specific so that what I don't understand is how, I don't see how any of this would be noticed so that anyone who was interested could even ask the question. I mean, if this is all most of it's done by staff, then how will anyone even know that these things are being done so that people who have questions can ask them? Is this stuff noticed anywhere?
I think Commissioner Monette, I think a lot of your questions will be addressed in the section of the administration and procedures, because that's where we will break down the various types of land use decisions, and is it a staff level approval, a commission, or does it ultimately go to council? And then aligned with that, what are the noticing requirements? Do we post signs? Do we notify? So, but we're not there quite yet, but I think this will be a very ripe discussion to have once we've drafted that section, and I think you will see a lot of your answers contained in there.
Well, can I just, okay, so I'm hearing that. Maybe I shouldn't be asking. I mean, the next two questions, for example, on page 34, 6E, letter E. See, I mean, can a member of the public request a public hearing on a project that the staff considers minor, but someone else might be seeing as in conflict with the general plan? For example, maintain the character of the city. Someone might see that something that was being improved as a, as a minor use permit, and it wouldn't even have to go to the planning commission. Would it, I suppose it wouldn't be noticed, but somebody might take issue. But okay, I don't need an answer tonight, but that's just another thing. But apropos of that, it says notice of decision could be given to the planning commission. I personally would like that to read notice of decision will be given to the planning commission, or at least the chair, because I think whenever a minor a use permit is issued, I think the planning commission should at least be notified. And then if they do want to appeal it, or I don't know. I don't know if the other members of the commission feel the same way, but I would like the word could to be changed to will at that place. And then let's see, okay. And then on page 37, what does content neutral ordinance mean with respect to adult oriented businesses? What does that mean?
Well, that's language taken directly from the Supreme Court of the United States with respect to the First Amendment.
So what does that mean, content neutral ordinance, though? What does that mean?
That means we can't regulate the content of the speech.
Oh, okay, because it's okay. Oh, so I should forget about understanding it literally. Okay. Okay, and then under page 39, my last question, under cannabis operations section, it doesn't make sense to me what they said there. Are we going to be going by state law? Can we prohibit cannabis businesses because they sell cannabis? That's the only reason, or as we have done in the past? Or does the state say that we must allow medical dispensaries? It wasn't clear to me what that paragraph said. I just couldn't make any sense out of it, which might be me, but I thought I'd ask anyway. And I had those questions. Can we deny cannabis business now just because we don't want people selling cannabis in our town? Because that was the basis of the disallowance previously.
I can offer an answer, but I believe our Assistant City Attorney, Mr. Walsh, is with us this evening as well, who could speak to with the state legislation. But I do believe cities have a choice on whether they want to allow dispensaries or not in their city limits.
Even medical dispensaries? Because I can understand the recreational, but I was just curious about the medical dispensaries. Or if there was a thing like if there isn't another one within 15 miles or anything like that. But I don't know if that should be in there or not. I just didn't understand what was there. And I was left with questions, and perhaps that's okay. Perhaps this particular document is not required to answer my questions with their statement. I don't know.
Ethan, are you there? Can you answer this, please?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks. Yes, we can. And to be honest, I apologize for this, but I'm not aware of what your regulations on cannabis say currently. But cities have restricted cannabis use in their jurisdictions. So you do have the ability to do that. And I think I would have to look that up. Because I'm not off the top of my head. I know we can restrict recreational marijuana, and I know some cities have done that. You can't restrict their ability to obtain medical marijuana, but people have a right to access to that, and and they have the ability to possess marijuana for recreational purposes too. But we do have the ability to use our land use authority to limit its locations in the city.
If you could find out whether that applies to medical too, I would appreciate it.
Sure, I can do that tonight and send the follow up to the planning commission.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. And one last thing, can we have a copy of the PowerPoint that was delivered tonight?
Yes.
And where in this meeting tonight, if any place, is the letter from the Family Services appropriate to, I don't know if that's appropriate for this meeting, but we did get that communication and it had to do with a zoning flip or switch. And I was wondering if that was something that was going to come up tonight, or is that for another meeting?
I can respond to that since you've mentioned it. We've been in ongoing conversations with them, and I believe they also participated in our last code meeting on May 5th with a request to have the property rezoned so their use could be expanded. So we're at this point looking at identifying properties that are potentially ripe to be rezoned concurrently with this zoning code update, which is a concurrent effort. And we're continuing to have conversations with them. So that one is on our list. And but it's we're not quite there with coming with the final list of all the map changes. Obviously, the ones that don't require general plan amendments are our priority, because those would be much easier to implement in less steps.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to express my support for them, if there was any need to. But okay, well, that's all I have. Thank you so much for everybody, for your patience and for the information. Thank you.
Any other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Pont, Vice Chair Pont, I should say.
Whatever. I'd like to say I appreciate you're attempting to restructure our code so it makes more sense, so you can actually find what you're looking for. But I do have some questions. It seems like some of these changes are very large. Is there any thought to doing some kind of sensitivity test on them so we know what they will do in real life when they hit the ground? I mean, I'd hate to essentially experiment and generate a lot of opposition. Question one.
I can start on that. This is Lisa Wise. So thank you for the question. I mean, you're right. It is a big shift, but it's not really an experiment, because we've done this before, and we've done it successfully, and other jurisdictions have been using similar systems really for decades. And if we think about your current system the way it is, it's just a long list of chapters. And as things get added, they just get listed at the bottom or inserted, in not always logical ways. So this hierarchy, really does make a lot of sense. First of all, grouping in parts, 5 parts, and then under each part, having chapters or sections that actually then sort of keep branching out. The exact, what goes in citywide, we could talk a little bit about that, but we highly recommend it based on best practice and things we've done a number of times. As you see the next part of the code, I think the zones, it'll be a little bit more clear how it fits together and how you would navigate through.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples.
Sorry.
For example, what's a minor permit? I mean, how big is a minor? I mean, what may have been acceptable in some jurisdictions may not be acceptable here, or vice versa. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, that we needed a sensitivity test on. The document in several places leans on transit as a substitute for automobiles. I'm afraid transit is not a substitute for an automobile in the city of St. Helena. We don't have enough of it. It's not frequent enough. So even the implication of that is a non-starter. So okay. I see things in the document that just may not work here, or that do not work here, literally.
Well, I think these are all topics that, as we bring administrative sections of codes, we can work out. On the minor use permit, it's a recommendation to for staff level review, and it would be really clear what that threshold was. So when things are a minor use permit at a staff level versus a conditional use permit and goes to the planning commission. And we would work through that as we start to talk about the zones at the next meeting and then the procedures at the meeting after that. I mean, these would be things we would kind of walk through really topic by topic before they were decided upon or before including them or not, and then before the thresholds were sort of established of what ends up to be a minor use permit versus a conditional use permit, for example. That's just an example of something that's in the code it's not decided yet. It's just first cut recommendations. And if the city doesn't, for instance, want a minor use permit, that's perfectly okay. It's
I don't know if we will or not, but where the ceiling and the floor is on that is extremely important to deciding whether or not it's going to be a useful tool here in the city of San Helena.
Right.
So
right.
Waiting till you write something and then we read it and say, that may or may not work, maybe a little too late in the process. So that's where my worries come from. As far as the address of some of these pieces, they seem to be aimed at urban problems and urban solutions. We are not an urban area. We don't have some of those problems, and I don't know if those solutions will work. I would just caution you as the author to be cognizant that we're a small town at 6,000 are likely to remain a small town for a very long time. That's why transit is not functional here. I love the idea of the graphics. I'm just concerned that everybody understands and that it's clear that a graphic in part X is only for part X. For example, one of your examples was landscaping strip around parking. Well, our current code also requires trees in the parking lot if the parking lot is large enough. That was not illustrated on that graphic. So however you do the graphics, I see either multiple graphics or one graphic that contains all the parts and pieces for that, and I don't know how you intend to address that. So I'd be curious to find out.
Well, I can start on that. Maybe Monica, you can chime in too. But when we write the code, the graphics only apply to the section that they're in. And on landscaping and parking, for instance, all the landscaping regulations would they would be in one place or the other. They wouldn't be separated into landscaping and parking. They would be in one place or the other so that you could see all the requirements in one place and included in one paragraph or included in one graphic. So you're right. I mean, it's not the intent to make things more complicated, especially the things that you want to get done. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but yeah.
It's a question that came up because I read your sample and just had one landscaping strip, didn't talk about the rest of the landscaping requirements for a parking lot. So I was curious as to how you're going to approach that.
Yeah, I'd say in general, illustrations, graphics, and a zoning code, we try to sort of tease things apart. So typically we wouldn't have a graphic in a zoning code that says, here's everything. Here's a whole combination of standards, and this is getting at what the final project we have in mind. We don't do that. Maybe a little bit of that in like a design guidelines document, but for a code, it's really about, it's teasing it apart. This is a standard, and you write the standard as clearly as you can, but sometimes it helps to have a graphic, and we're really just illustrating one or a couple of things at a time.
As long as it's clear at that graphic,
that's a key,
and not any other pieces, that's fine. In fact, I see graphics as being helpful, but if they're not clear, they make things worse rather than better. On your classification system, is there any thought to using standard codes for some of those? Like SIC codes?
For the zones, you mean, instead of like a
for example, on page 37, you group vehicle towing, gas stations, auto sales, and rentals in one use, right? I'm not exactly sure that's one use, particularly the towing and gas station. I don't know if it belongs with sales and rentals. So I'm wondering if there's any thought to use SIC codes to break some of these out, or to look at the divisions that come up in SIC codes.
Well, we haven't done that in the code before. I guess it could be explored, but the intent of the code is a couple of things. It's regulating land uses and things that might want to get permitted in the same way. They might all want to be by right, or they might all want to be conditional uses, so that that's clear in terms of the intensity or the impact on adjacent properties. What page are you on in the document? I was trying to find it.
Page 37 of 84.
37.
Adopt a use classification about automobile sales and services.
I think it's page 22 of the memo.
I'm using the electronic.
Okay. Yeah. So what this is trying to do, though, is so if somebody is using, has a use that they want to go into, St. Helena, they're a hotel, or they're a restaurant, or there's something. It's sort of like, they go to the way this is grouped, and they say, I'm a restaurant. Here's eating and drinking establishments. Here's a list. What zones can I do that in? Restaurants.
And I didn't have any trouble with that. The one that raised the questions in my mind was automobile vehicle sales and services. I thought that was rather broad to have vehicle towing, gas stations, along with vehicle sales and leasing.
Well, vehicle sales and leasing could go under some, more of the commercial, retail kind of category. But because of the size of them, we usually group them together with automobile and sales.
I'm just trying to caution to maybe look at these categories with an eye towards a smaller community that wouldn't have a vehicle towing and impound yard right next door to vehicle sales and leasing in the downtown core. Or even maybe in service commercial. We'd want that kind of thing of industrial zone. So I'm just trying to caution you that the way this memo is written, you may want to do your splits a little finer.
Okay.
Also, when we rework the land use list of land uses, we sort of start with the ones you have and kind of work from there, taking a cue from the feedback that we got from the community and from you now.
And I recognize that. I'm just trying to keep all of us from going down a road that we'll want to find ourselves backing up on, to stick with the automobile analogy.
Okay.
Let's see. One more, and this is a pretty specific question. Page 43, under 5C, the last sentence, it seems to imply, if I can read it, the code will support modifying permitted densities consistent with the general plan in select areas or districts. Modifying the densities established in the general plan through a general plan amendment. Does that mean this zoning rewrite is going to push forward a general plan amendment to change densities?
Not necessarily. We understood from the beginning of the project that was something that we that the community might want us to be open to. It isn't necessarily a recommendation at this stage.
Yeah, Vice Chair Pont, there are some density changes that have been on a council list of things to discuss post-adoption of the general plan. At least what came up specifically, I think we've discussed it at least briefly before, is an area near, basically in Commissioner Manette's neighborhood, where there's been some discussion of downzoning from high density to medium density, but that can't be done then without a balancing upzoning. And the bottom line is then one is compelled by the new state law to look at the whole scheme. And since the mixed use district will create new opportunities for housing, then that fits in somewhere to that discussion. So I think there, and I've lost track of exactly where we are in the housing element cycle, but that's going to come into play somewhere too. That's my understanding.
I recognize that under the new state law, we have to be neutral at the end of the day, neutral or to the positive side.
Exactly.
This didn't seem to lead in that direction. It just said, we're going to do an amendment. I was trying to figure out what it meant. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did we get to the end of your questions?
Pretty much. By the way, the adorable housing for farm workers, you may want to change that to affordable.
I don't know. Adorable sounds pretty good. How about adorable affordable?
I'll vote for that.
Yeah. Can I ask another thing?
Well, I was thinking.
I mean, if no one else has anything.
Yeah, I think we should keep going, give everyone a chance here. So
Of course, yeah.
I'm having a hard time keeping everyone on my screen at the same time. But Commissioner Anderson or Commissioner Hale, are there any questions in your Zoom neighborhood?
I think I'm good for right now. The outline seems really solid and straightforward, and kind of looking forward to getting deeper into it.
Thank you. Commissioner Hale.
Yeah, I'd like to I have one, I think the graphic piece of it is really vitally important. And I understand that we will have layers of that. That one picture isn't always worth 1,000 words. I mean, it sometimes you'll need to, but I think with all these things, a lot of the concerns that we've heard tonight are reasonable, but I think it'll be easier to deal with some of those when the thing gets a little more specific. I'm expecting lots of questions on certain items, but I think we're not quite there yet. I think the general outline of things, the goal to clarity, of course, makes sense to me. I think it's yet to be, the proof will be in the pudding as to, whether we pick up this document in the end and it is more clear. I think from the point of view of somebody who's gotten kind of comfortable with the format we have, I think I would reasonably expect that my worry is that you're going to have this space of adjusting and kind of learning the new layout, where it's going to take people that apply the code regularly and apply it to get up to speed as to how it relates to the old one, how it relates to the new one. I think, and that makes sense. It doesn't mean you don't touch it. The one question I did have in the kind of outline was the bold type that said low threshold for design review. And I don't know if you could just clarify my understanding of that, because it seems to, as we're trying to go towards more objective and which I get and I support, I'm a little, it seems like that's a little askew to that goal to me.
It's a little what to that goal?
Askew or
Oh, okay, gotcha.
not in line.
Okay.
Are you looking at one particular page, or is it just a general comment about design review?
It was just the general comment on, it was one of the bold, in your outline.
In the slide deck?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can,
Reduce, a better way to say it might be reduce reliance on discretionary review. So sometimes we have like levels of design review, maybe like a minor or design review level 1 or 2. It's sort of like the minor use permit versus a use permit, something that can be handled at the staff level to reduce reliance on discretionary review. That might be a better way to say that.
right, that sounds much clearer to me and much different than.
I hear you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, I think that's, I mean, I know there's more coming, and I think we're trying to chew on things that aren't that clear right now, which makes sense. But
Right.
I think we have to be patient for the next round. So generally, I think the outline makes sense, and I'm hoping for better clarity.
Thank you. So on that note, though, the state is pushing all jurisdictions to get away from discretionary review of multifamily and mixed use development that has 2/3 residential. So a lot of jurisdictions don't want to do that. You know, everybody's not happy about that, but that is what the state's making us do. So that some of the language might be related to that also. So we'll need to work with you, you know, on getting the standards, objective design standards in place, so you get the same or better delivered results. But that's something, like you said, I think there's a lot to be worked out. There's a lot to be worked out. This is just, you know, not the beginning of the beginning, but it's the beginning of writing the code. We haven't drafted anything. We're just kind of doing a deep dive, and really the document in front of you, while it's not perfect and we're taking all your comments and incorporating them into our thinking, it's sort of just getting some ideas out there, some explanations, test the waters, so we get a better understanding of where the commission stands on some of these things. When we come back the next round with recommendations, we'll take all this into account.
I think maybe it's my turn. If we covered your questions, Commissioner Hale.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you. So
Can I go after you then? I had one more thing, and that's okay. I don't mind going after you.
I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
No worries. Really have a few comments, more than questions. I like the outline. I like the overall structure. I've been working with this zoning ordinance in its current format for 30 years, and I still have a hard time finding things if I haven't seen them in the last 3 or 4 years or so, at least some kinds of things. So I think that's great. And more particular comments, I don't really know what was intended by the plan development overlay, but I do know that it has been most frequently used by small developers of infill projects because it was a tool that enabled them to address setbacks and other manners with some flexibility so that the constraints of small or inconveniently configured parcels could be addressed successfully in terms of how the projects were laid out. So if we are to eliminate the planned development overlay, then I'll certainly want to be sure that our other remedies section is, as I think our consultants have told us, there to facilitate the kinds of situations that come up in the infill setting, and where people are looking for opportunities to increase density in residential neighborhoods in particular. And thinking about the rural residential overlay, I haven't gone to look at the map to see if I can make sense out of it that way, but it does remind me that in the larger picture, we have a kind of tension. I'm not sure it rises exactly to the level of contradiction, but in a number of our agricultural zoning districts, we clearly elevate residential use over agricultural. And it seems to me that just overall, it would be a good thing to revisit those parts of the code and think carefully about what we're prioritizing and why in terms of uses in the areas we currently have zoned agricultural. And that's really it for me for now, although I wanted to say one thing in response to some of your questions earlier, Commissioner Manette. I did quickly open up the code to see what's there now with respect to marijuana dispensaries, et cetera. And we have a whole section in the zoning ordinance right now. It prohibits both recreational marijuana dispensaries and medical marijuana dispensaries. It prohibits all commercial production. And so the only thing our code allows at present is the personal grows that are allowed under the medical marijuana statute or statutes adopted by the state a while back. And I have no sense myself whether our ordinance as it exists today is consistent with current state law or not, but I did look to see what was in it.
Well, thank you. Because I thought that they allowed delivery of medical marijuana. At first, they were not going to allow delivery for patients who had a doctor's prescription for marijuana, medical marijuana, and that they changed it. I thought they changed the ordinance to allow specifically to, because initially they wouldn't do it. I could be, if you didn't see it, at least there is no prohibition.
Anything about it one way or the other.
Yeah, so I guess they took out the prohibition.
All commercial grows are prohibited.
Yeah.
And all dispensaries are prohibited. That's what I said.
Okay.
But I took quickly.
Chair Hardy, this is Ethan again. And I did double check. I just didn't want to misspeak when we talked before, but I did double check with one of our cannabis attorneys while we were in the meeting, and she did confirm that is consistent with state law. You can prohibit retailers outright, medicinal and recreational. Okay. You cannot prohibit personal grows for medical use. You cannot prohibit deliveries, as Commissioner Monette mentioned, but those would have to come from, they do have to come from a fixed location. So that would have to be from a fixed location outside of the city. So what you described right now is consistent with the current state of
What do you mean
state
by
law.
Fixed location? What does that mean?
So it has to come from an actual building, from an actual like
Okay.
firm location, and so that is licensed, that has the appropriate licensing. And so, but if you prohibit them within the city, then it would have to be from a location that's outside of the city. But you can't prohibit people from coming into the city to do those deliveries. But that's not really a land use issue, anyways.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Manette, I believe you had
Yeah, I
something.
had one thing I wasn't sure. I mean, I did ask for, and I wondered how the rest of the commission felt. I did ask for a word change on page 34, 6F as in Frank, to go from notice of decision could be given to the PC to notice of decision will be. I'm wondering if other members of the commission feel as strongly about that as I do, that we should know when the minor use permits are granted. But perhaps that's not a very good practice for the city. It might be a lot of work for that. I'm not sure, but that's what I would like, and I wanted to know what the rest of the commission thought.
Very good. So are there any comments then from other commissioners? Commissioner Anderson? Do you have there you are, unmiked or mic?
I don't have a preference either way. I'd be fine with it changing. But yeah, I don't have a preference.
Thank you. Commissioner Hale?
I mean, I kind of feel like we're a little premature, a little early to make that call. I think I'd be happy to once that ordinance is in and it lists that procedure, whether it, I think that'll flesh out in time. I don't feel the need to necessarily make that call because to me it's not clear enough what I'd be calling. So I think if that procedure, I'm comfortable waiting till that procedure goes into place. I think that might be more effective.
Thank you. Vice Chair Pont.
At this point, I would tend to agree with Dan's point that the information behind that hasn't been fleshed out. How many of these going to see? How big are they? How often? But I would say I would lean towards, if anything, more complete information being made available to the commission. So at the end of the day, I think I would like to see all these things, but maybe they're going to be too minor to even think about. I don't know. That depends how the code is written. Just like the minor permits, maybe we'll want to see those too. But until we know what constitutes minor, it's hard to say. Just like I think she had two other items in here that said we can either do a use permit, do it by ministerial permit, or I can't remember the last option, but you had that for daycare centers, I think was one of them.
Yeah.
So until we know how often and how many and how big is going to be ministerial, it's hard to say. But I would lean towards let's see them.
Very good. Well, I'm in terms of our process, I'm with Commissioner Hale. I think this is, and Vice Chair Pond, I think it's simply too soon to make decisions of that sort. We need the whole matrix, I think, of permitting alternatives that we're talking about here. I can't say philosophically, I believe pretty strongly that ministerial approvals should stay ministerial, and the risk of that comes with presenting them to the commission in any form is that commissioners will want to exercise discretion even if they're ministerial. But things that aren't truly ministerial are a different matter. So with that said, my inclination is to propose that we take a 10-minute break, come back, open a public hearing, invite comments from those who have been patiently listening to us and absorbing the presentation, and see where we go from there. So if there are no objections, I will adjourn the meeting for a 10-minute break. Let's come back, please, at 7:40. Thank you.
they want to tell Americans how to live.
Braver man than I am, Daniel. Are you outside?
I am outside.
Oh,
I thought I'd get some air.
yeah. Well, chew well.
Yeah. Best. It's not. It seems a little better right now.
It looked a little better from my deck. I could see out across and see the hills on the far side where I couldn't earlier today.
Yeah, it's better.
But still, it's still pretty chewy out there.
Yeah, it doesn't smell. It doesn't smell too bad right now.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move in if it seems.
Well, it's as good as smoking or as bad as smoking, however you want to look at it. That PM 2.5 is nasty stuff.
Well, it's 7:40, so I'm going to reopen the meeting.
Oh, we just just looking at purple air. The map, yeah, St. Helena is yellow. It's a big yellow with some red around the edge. Sorry, just to
No worries. No worries.
air quality. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are big averages. The air movement and wind direction changes a lot with local topography. So, so I need to. I have a request to keep the meeting moving forward. I'm going to honor that, and so I will open the public hearing, and someone, I think, is going to tell me whether or not there is any member of the public who wishes to speak.
At this time, I don't see anyone, but if you want to give it just a moment.
Yeah, I see a couple hands going up right now, in fact. So, So we have our first speaker.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Please identify yourself and then speak.
I'm Christine Hain-Lees. I'm a board member of the Up Valley Family Center. We are in a situation where we are outgrowing our building and would like to increase our capacity to serve the people of St. Helena, specifically the vulnerable low-income residents. But we've discovered that our zoning currently is medium density residential. We're attached to the Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterian Church actually owns our parcel, but the parcel that we're on is legal non-conforming. Basically, the pastor used to own that parcel, and it was the pastor's house, but the church has built over that, which makes it even more complicated. But in order to build on our property, to increase our space, we need to downzone. And apparently with the new legal regulations, that means that we have to have another property within St. Helena that will upzone. So that's what we're requesting, is that hopefully we'll be able to find somebody or a property that will be able to switch our zoning issue, or our zoning, whatever. Yeah.
Thank you. I do understand the nature of that challenge there. Is there, well, I think we do have another member of the public who wishes to speak.
Yes, we do. Stevenson, go ahead.
Hi, this is Mary Stevenson. I'm on the board of Our Town St. Helena Affordable Housing Advocacy Group. I first would like to say I'm very impressed with the logic and the organization that you're recommending for the zoning plan. I think that will help a great deal in the future. I have two questions, and they're both forward-thinking towards your next meeting in November. And the first is something I think Lester commented on earlier, and that is when the general plan was finally approved, my understanding it was approved with a lot of caveats that things need to be changed in the general plan. And I'm wondering what if the changes that are necessary in the general, or should be made in the general plan, that affect this zoning code. Is there a plan to coordinate those two activities on a parallel course? And my second question is for the meeting in November, where we'll be actually talking about zoning changes, what is the procedure for actually changing zoning, and the like the things that Christine just involved, but also the zoning changes that we would like to see so more affordable housing can be built? Is that part of the plan for the revision of the zoning code, or is that something that happens after this zoning code is completed? And I say that both of those are forward-looking questions, so if you don't want to answer them tonight, that's fine, but I want to make sure that those are on your radar as you work from today towards the November meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I can shed some light on the process, I think. I know there has been at least some discussion of concurrent processing of some housing-related general plan amendments with the hope or thought that the corresponding changes in the zoning ordinance could be part
How
of
was that?
the state. But I would caution that this close to an election, it's probably best to wait until after the election before thinking too hard about amendments to the general plan itself. That's just, again, a practical process consideration. And then with respect to the policies that are in the new general plan that may have some effect on housing, such as the general plan policies regarding mixed use, which will generate a new zoning district or a new set of zoning policies, but I think it's being contemplated as a new zoning district. Those are the things for sure we're working on as part of this update. And there will be some things undoubtedly that sort of separate and apart from what we're doing right now are likely to come up in connection with the next housing element update, and other things will just be, individual projects. Although the new state law requirement that there can be no downzoning without corresponding upzoning. Certainly does make even looking at an individual parcel like the family center parcel more challenging just in terms of the scope of it. So those were my thoughts. I don't know if our planning director has anything to add.
I can provide an update of where we are in the housing element cycle. We should be getting our preliminary RENA numbers. We're being told it's going to be early next year or early spring. But they're really encouraging cities to not wait for that to initiate their process. We actually are hoping to get some seed money through a LEAP grant to actually get a consultant on board this year. And so we'll be looking at, underutilized sites. So it's actually very opportunistic that we have the housing element opportunity mapping, or where sites that are underutilized, or we can actually look to maximize density aligned with this possible zoning map amendments that may happen through this effort. And also the ability to realize creative housing types that are not currently thought of in our zoning code, such as cottage style housing, co-housing. These are all things that it's a little premature. We haven't, drilled deep enough to get into that. But these are all things that will really help us achieve what I expect to be a very ambitious number assignment of allocations that we're going to receive, unprecedented. And so we will still be, the zoning code will still be open at that time in early spring. We will hopefully have navigated our base districts, but it will still leave time to assess our opportunities of where we want to do some specific rezonings, and then help also with that equation of balancing out to make sure, first and foremost, no net loss of density, and where it makes sense to increase that density.
Thank you. I have received a special plea. Our city clerk is working under very challenging conditions back at the Vintage Hall without any air conditioning. So although I want to be sure that we hear from every member of the public who wishes to be heard. So I'm going to go back to Amalia and ask her if anyone else is indicating an interest in speaking.
Not at this time. We do not have any additional comment.
Okay, seeing none then, I'm going to close the public hearing. And I guess, my question now really is for the consultants and staff. Do you all need any further direction from the commission, or are we ready to let the city clerk free? Free Cindy. It's going to be a bumper strip.
Maya, do you want me to answer that? So I think we're good, Chair Hardy. We appreciate all the comments. There's lots of work to be done still, and the recommendations report is just recommendations, as some of the commissioners said. It's non-binding. It's a start. Laid out some options, and as we actually draft the code, we'll bring all this back to you, so you have more to react to and see how it kind of all fits together as a package. So I think for tonight we're good in terms of really we just wanted to go through the report and make sure that we were on the right track generally, and if you had comments like you did tonight about things with you're a small town, the discretionary review process, uses and things like that, I think we got an understanding of the general direction that a lot of the commissioners would like to go. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done before the draft goes out, not until like next spring, right? So it's a lot of time.
Very good. Thank you. Any commissioner with a burning desire to add something? Seeing none, hearing none, then I want to thank everyone first and foremost. Thanks to Monica and Lisa and everyone else who's contributed to the project so far, and to Director DeRosa and our staff. Special thanks to the city clerk, Cindy Sapopoulos, sweltering under nearly inhumane conditions without air conditioning in that little media room. I can imagine with all the electronics heating the space up, it could be a bit uncomfortable. Have no difficulty imagining that at all. And thanks to all the members of the public who came to listen and to comment. And, to you all, please stay well, stay safe, and be strong. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
What are we, chopped liver?